All right, today I want us to talk about fear and gratitude. And I think these are two things that we don't typically pair together. But I think that gratitude may very well be the key that can help us unlock our fears. Now, when I say fear, I don't mean like things we should be scared of. Like, trust your intuition. There's lots of things that we should be scared of. God created us that way, it keeps us safe. But when it comes to fear, what I'm talking about is this pervasive thing that can run in the background and be in the driver's seat in our lives without us even realizing it. Right? It's a fear of failure that keeps us from trying new things, a fear of rejection that keeps us from putting ourselves out there and being vulnerable, a fear of the unknown, right? Because it's scary. We don't know what to expect. And so most of us have some kind of fear that is running in the background that's kind of messing with our lives. And most of us, we respond in really similar ways if we think about this big picture, right? Many of us fight when we experience fear. Many of us, we freeze in the state of fear and we kind of don't leave bad situations, like we stay in toxic relationships or we stay in jobs that are sucking the life out of us. And then in other instances, we flee. And that's what I want us to focus on right now. Because in my experience, when we flee from our fears, we typically don't flee forward towards our purpose or towards progress or towards any kind of significance. No, when we flee backwards. We flee back to things that are known but aren't necessarily good for us. Right? Think about the journey that's behind you and how far you've come and how maybe you've changed your way of thinking. You've become more mature. You've managed to get rid of addictions in your life. You've managed to exit toxic relationships or whatever that looks like. There's so many ways we've grown. Like think about how you've grown and how you've changed. Now imagine fleeing back to those things. That's what fear can do to us, right? Fear can send us backwards to the things that have caused us pain in the past. And we find ourselves in the places that we never wanted to be in the first place. And this is so significant because if we want to walk forward into the purpose and the plan that God has for our life, we can't let fear sit in the driver's seat. And so I want to talk about just a quick story. Well, it's not quick, but a story from scripture that I think really, really highlights this well and can show us how gratitude can unlock the fear in our lives. And so the Old Testament is all about the story of God's people, the Israelites. And their history is very, very difficult, lots of highs and lows. And so, in one specific era, they find themselves slaves in Egypt, right? This is the whole 10 plagues and the let my people go situation. And so, for generations, they have been slaves, but then they are freed, something that they have wanted for so long. And they leave and they're praising God and they're just so excited. But the first moment that fear hits, they want to flee. But they don't want to flee. They don't flee forward to the promises that God has for them. They want to flee backwards, back to Egypt, a place that they have pled to leave for generations. They wanted to flee backwards because it was known, because it was where they were comfortable in many ways, because they were too afraid to move forward. And we see this trend happen where God creates and makes amazing things happen, just incredible provisions, whether it's water coming from a rock or food coming from the sky and all kinds of different cool things. As a kid, I always remember thinking about these miracles and thinking, man, if I saw that, I would have a ton of faith. But if we look at the story of the Israelites, we can see that in our humanity, it's really easy to forget what's just been done for us when a new problem arises in front of us. And so, right, our eyes are focused on the fear in front of us. And so we see this trend over and over again. God does something cool, fear hits. They want to flee backward. And so this trend continues until they reach the edge of the Jordan River in their journey as they left Egypt. And at the edge of the Jordan on the other side was the promised land. All right, this was a land that God had promised to his people, a place where they could have a legacy, a place where they could have purpose that looked very different than being slaves in Egypt. And so they're there. I'm sure they're fired up and excited to be at the end of this journey. And so they send a bunch of guys to go over and scout the land. And all of these guys, they have the same experience. They see the beauty and the bounty and the provisions that are there for them, but they also see obstacles that are going to be there, right? Things that they want to or that they should be scared of and they fear. And so they all go back to their camp, and most of them say, nope, it's too much. We can't handle it. Not going to happen. And that flee comes back in. They want to flee backwards to Egypt, right? And so they say a bunch of things. I won't get into it, but it's really interesting how quickly the people will turn on God and will turn on their leaders when fear kicks in. But two of those men, they have a different kind of faith because they look back and they can remember and they can see everything that God has done for them, how far he's taken them, how he's provided for them, how he's protected them. And they can look back. And when we look back, we can find a gratitude for what's already been done for us. And I think this is the mentality they take. Like, if God did it for us then certainly he's got us now. But they get outvoted. And so ultimately, that generation would never go into the promised land, never step into their purpose and the place that God had created for them. But two of them would. Those two that had faith, that came back and said that God could do it, that they should cross into the promised land, they were the only two people from that generation that would get to go. All right, those two in the next generation were who were able to cross into the promised land. You know, for so many of them, fear shouted louder than faith. But for a small number, they let their faith and their gratitude for how far God had brought them, they turned the volume up on that, and it drowned out the fear that was happening that had crippled everyone else. And so today in our lives, you know, I think we can easily want to flee from fear, right? And let it carry us backwards. But instead, I want us to follow the model that these two men set. And instead of just focusing on the problem in front of us, I want to encourage you to look back. And I want you to encourage you to go and look and see how far you've come, how far you've grown, how much you've overcome, how much God has done in your life and provided for you, and turn and choose gratitude, because in that you're going to see what God has done and what he can do. And maybe that can turn up the volume on faith to drown out fear today. I don't think it's going to fix it immediately or perfectly, but I do know that gratitude does make a difference. And so take a lot of minutes this week to look back and to find gratitude so it builds up your faith so that you can overcome the fear in your life. Because here's the thing, we don't want to be stuck on the wrong side of the Jordan. We don't want to be a stone's throw from God's purpose and plan in our lives and yet stay over on the wrong side of the Jordan because of fear, right? So let's not be people who put fear in the driver's seat. Let's be people who dip our toe in, who take that first step to cross the Jordan into the promised land that God has for us. And so I hope this is helpful to you today. I think it's really significant, and I hope you carry it into the next week with you. Now, really quick, if you watch these videos every week, next week, I'm actually going to send this out a day earlier because next week is Thanksgiving. And next week's topic is going to be about gratitude and resentment. All right, and let's get really real. Like the holidays, we're going to spend them with our family. Resentment comes up and it shows its ugly face really quick. And so let's figure out together how we can use gratitude to set some of those resentments aside and have great and life-giving conversations and relationships as we enter this holiday season. So you are not going to want to miss that. Honestly, I'm going to be preaching to myself just as much as I am to anybody else. And so make sure you hop back on next week on Tuesday because it's going to be great. So thanks, guys. See you later.